As I mentioned last week, we're going to look today at fiction writing, writing stories, and in particular at authors who have a reputation for creating characters in their books who are known as unreliable narrators. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, originally in the 19th century, it tended to simply mean that, as a reader, you just couldn't trust what the narrator of a story was telling you. This might have been because they were not giving you important information, or because they themselves, as a character in their own story, lacked some kind of personal insight. In later works of literature, this unreliability was used by authors more deliberately, with the direct intention of making a story more complicated for a reader to understand, perhaps a crime novel or a thriller. Nowadays, there's a lot more humour in unreliable narration, and it's often used to make first-person characters enjoyable to read about. So, what all that tells us as a general starting point is that this type of narration
When you first examine something under a microscope, say a leaf from a plant, you're amazed at how much detail there is, and it's detail that you simply cannot see without magnification. And what you can see with the naked eye becomes suddenly huge under the lens. How big everything looks is astonishing, but it's also amazingly intricate. Suddenly, it's as if another world has opened up in front of your eyes, and you think, hey, I hadn't realized that something so small, so tiny, could be so
It's been suggested that we get rid of the study of humanities altogether. Some say studying subjects like history, philosophy, politics, literature, anthropology, and so on has no intrinsic value. And why should we waste time and energy on courses of study that won't lead directly to a cut-and-dried career? They say that what the world needs now is specialists, not generalists. Well, I have to say I couldn't disagree more. Of course we want to produce well-informed, literate, highly functioning citizens who make solid contributions to society. That's an idea that still holds sway, but that's not the reason that I believe studying the humanities is valuable. People who study a breadth of topics and who have a diverse range of interests are actually better problem solvers. This broad education means they can approach an issue
Surfing has been a central part of Hawaiian culture for hundreds of years. But surfing wasn't just a pastime for the Hawaiians in ancient times. It served as a kind of training exercise, meant to keep chiefs in top physical condition. Chiefs demonstrated their mastery by their skill in the surf, and commoners gained popularity by the way they handled themselves in the ocean. As well as this, surfing served as a system for conflict resolution. Young males would test their surfing skills in fierce competitions, during which wealth, pride, and even romance
We learn most about ourselves and the way we function, both physically and mentally, when things go wrong. For a long time, it was thought that the brain acted as a whole in governing the body's functions. Then, in 1861, Paul Broca, a French anatomist and anthropologist, discovered that different parts of the brain perform different functions. After carrying out a post-mortem examination on a patient who had had a severe speech impediment, he discovered, as he had expected, damage to a section of the left frontal lobe of the brain. The left side of the brain governs language ability. The patient's problem had been that he could only utter one syllable, though he fully
The Chinese were, as far as we know, the inventors of paper money, and, because it was so easy to move around compared with coins, it was named flying money. They were also the first to experience an economic problem which has become all too familiar. By the 12th century, there was enough money in circulation to cause serious inflation. In Europe, it wasn't until about 1400 that bankers in Spain and Italy began to honour bills of exchange, which were a kind of private paper money not in general use. They were documents used by those involved in a business transaction in which payment was made through a third party to avoid the cost of foreign exchange. However, it is the Swedes who are generally credited with producing the first proper European bank.
everyone with a mobile phone is able to take photographs, or even make a video. But originally cameras were so large and heavy that photography's appeal as a pastime was limited to a few enthusiasts. Also, the time needed for the exposure meant that your subjects, if you were photographing people, had to remain still for what must have seemed like a very long time. Movement would come out as a blur in the picture, or, if someone walked across the view of the lens, would not register at all, which is why early photographs of city streets appear deserted. In other words, all pictures had to be posed. However, as early as the 1880s, manufacturers in both Europe and America began producing miniature models, some of them small enough to be hidden in people's clothing. Cameras came in all shapes and sizes. Handbags, walking stick handles, and tie pins were among the oddest, and were collectively known as detective cameras. This was not because they were used in police work, but because the user could move about without attracting attention.
Most, if not all, young men and women have dreams of the future which include themselves, their families, and possibly their country. At one time or another, they evaluate and criticize their own society and think of the changes they would like to make. For most people, however, the biggest contribution they can make to their society's development and change is through the careers they will follow, rather than through direct political action. For the lucky few, their careers will be interesting as well as allowing them to make a measurable contribution to the growth of their country. This is why it is important to know something about the career aspirations of young people and the reasons for their interest in these ideal careers. At the same time, it is equally important to consider whether their aspirations are
When parents are asked how they handle their very unruly children, most will admit that they are likely to use physical forms of punishment. This is not to say that a parent generally hits their child each and every time they are bad. Nevertheless, parents generally use physical punishment as a last resort, after having unsuccessfully tried other forms of discipline with children who have become very bad. Those who believe in physical punishment, however, are unaware of the fact that it does not lead to better children. In fact, the opposite is true. Research findings show that children from homes where corporal punishment is the norm exhibit more antisocial behaviour than children whose parents seldom or never hit them. For example, children whose parents systematically use corporal punishment are more often than not behind any classroom disruptions. Such children not only create discipline problems at school, but they are also overly aggressive. In addition, they have extremely low self-esteem and a negative attitude to those around them. On the other hand, children whose parents use less harsh methods of discipline have a healthier attitude towards their school environment and
Too many students search for material by going to what they think is the right shelf in the library, finding little or nothing, and then reporting back to their tutor that there's nothing on it in the library. If you have some authors and titles in mind, look them up in the catalogue. They may not be where you think. And look at adjacent entries in the catalogue and on the shelves. The catalogue may lead you to restricted loan collections, reserve stacks, or departmental collections, which may not always be obvious. You should also check the subject catalogue, trying to think of related terms. Other places to look would be the reference shelves and newspaper section, though a problem here is finding